In the past, Huntsman has been winning by beating its competitors. But this won't allow you to be the victor in the future. Instead, you'll have to work with your competitors. I'm here today with my colleagues Augusta, Josephine, and Laura. I am Charlotte, and we are Freja Consulting. So while you've been winning in the chemical industry, you've also been facing the need to cut both costs and emissions. Unfortunately, you don't have the volume needed in order to achieve these goals through scaling your transportation. So we looked into how we can optimize your logistics through a barge joint venture in order to ensure lower costs, lower emissions, and also better collaboration with the Port of Rotterdam. And this brought us to Uniting for a Better Future.
So looking at the Huntsman organization, you've actually been through some internal restructurings in order to cut some costs, but you've able to maintain the same level of customer service as previously. When the European logistics manager, Lean Windels, is then asked to further cut costs, he says this is no longer an option. The bottle is empty. However, this is with the fixed costs, and then we looked into the variable costs of your logistics. And we can actually see that with using railroad, you've been experiencing excessive costs due to delays and bottlenecks. And actually, a typical production facility, 38% of the product's total costs come from transportation, which is why we see a possibility of reducing this variable cost to get the cut costs that you're looking for and actually also reduce your emissions.
So we looked at the different modes of transportation that are available to you, and we can see that on all parameters, barge is the most efficient and the one that fits your company the best. The cost is the lowest, it has the lowest emissions and the highest safety. But then why aren't you already using barge? In order for barge to actually be efficient, you need a certain scale and a certain volume in terms of what you need to deliver. And on its own, Huntsman simply just isn't there.
Which is why we want you to look at uniting with like-minded players in the market in order to utilize volume to freight on barges and to increase your bargaining power for improved agreements with the Port of Rotterdam. So when we look at the competitive market or the market in general with small players like you, we see that many of them don't have the shipping volume to actually utilize barges as their main or as a logistics transportation or it's logistics. And they also don't have the bargaining power over a supplier such as Port of Rotterdam to create the needed facilities for these barges. However, there's a clear opportunity in partnering together with these like-minded players to not only increase your bargaining power over, for example, the Port of Rotterdam, but also to increase your shipping volume to actually be able to utilize barges efficiently. Now, the Netherlands actually have a tradition for collaboration, and working together is a key part of your psyche. You're also part of what Hofstede would categorize as a collectivist society. So you might ask, why hasn't this been done before? Why haven't like-minded players gone together to collaborate for the needed facilities they need? And in your example of Huntsman, you've focused on internal levers in order to cut costs first, which is also what is typically done and is also typically the most effective in the first instance. However, you're still looking to cut costs, which is why we see a clear possibility in partnering together with other players in order to optimize your logistics.
So having determined that we need to collaborate, we took a closer look at who it would make sense to collaborate with. And we saw that going through the Organization of Chemical Parks in Europe, of which you are already a member, would be the opportunity that would drive the highest impact with the lowest needed effort. So the Chemical Parks in Europe is an association of firms within the segment that are working to improve the competitive advantage and make sure that Europe can stay a key market for chemicals. And so as a member of this network, you'll be able to utilize it to facilitate the contact with other like-minded players and establish a strong association.
So if we look more specifically at the business case for creating an association for the use of barges, our analysis found three key value propositions for the companies. Firstly, these companies are all small players in their specific fields, meaning that they're currently not able to ship large volumes, such that they are not able to utilize barges as a transportation mode that's both low cost, low emission, and more safe. Secondly, these companies are all based in Europe, meaning that they have to, just like Huntsman, comply with the EU regulations on sustainability as well as the International Maritime Organization's requirements. Lastly, these companies are, as stated, all small players, meaning that they're currently not able to utilize economies of scale in transportation. As transportation is considered a non-value added activity, these companies are all interested in driving down transportation costs to the minimum. So this strategy enables to address all three value propositions and will add benefits that are both monetary, sustainable, and brand value added. However, Augusta will tell you a lot more about this later on.
But first, I will tell you more about the network. The association we will enter into will take part in an integrated network, not only with us, but also with the Port of Rotterdam and barge carriers, where each party brings important stakes to the table. Looking first at the association that we propose you enter into, you will gain bargaining power and allow for economies of scale, which enables you to decrease cost and CO2 emissions. You'll provide a stable demand, which allows the barge carriers to increase their capacity and their efficiency. Looking next at the Port of Rotterdam, they will get increased brand value because they support an initiative which is sustainable, which is highly important in today's society. Further, they will also expand the European network and hereby draw more positive attention to themselves. They will provide facilitation between the parties, which are the association and the barge carriers, and further support with the existing port infrastructure. The barge carriers will gain a stable demand and the opportunity to increase capacity because they now have the stable demand and hereby get increased revenues. In return, they will provide more frequent barge routes, which increase flexibility for the association and for us, so the barge is actually a viable option.
So if we look more specifically at the logistics chain, our analysis showed that Europe is actually a highly attractive region due to its large and well-connected river system, as well as relatively short distances that allow for the use of barge. In the logistics chain that you can see to the right, the most important elements are found in transportation from plant to port and from port to Europe. From plant to port, we found that the Rotterdam plant is actually located relatively close to the plant and also nearby the water, meaning that it's actually possible to utilize barges for this purpose. However, due to the low volume shipped from the plant to the port, the usage of barges would mean that you also have to compromise on your frequency of shipments. And this entails higher prices on inventory, which is why we do not propose to go in this direction. Therefore, it's still most viable to go with truck transportation, but by having this minimized, you'll also be able to minimize costs. Secondly, as we saw in the case material, the transportation from port to the world is already highly efficient due to investments from Port of Rotterdam. However, from port to Europe, our analysis found that this partnership can actually be leveraged to utilize barge transportation across Europe. This means that instead of using rail or road, you can have a lower cost, lower emission, and more safe system of distributing across Europe. Lastly, there always exists some last mile delivery, which is not possible to mitigate at all times. So for this, we still have to propose to use truck transportation, but since this distance is highly minimized, you are able to cut costs to the minimum.
So as Laura said, if we just minimize the cost, there's a huge gain to add, both in transportation and in cost reduction. If we first look at the cost savings, if we go with barges, they have a wider range of distance that they can go per kilometer in comparison to both trains and trucks. This means that it's more cost sufficient to actually go with barges because you get a longer mile per gallon that you use. Further, they also have a great amount of capacity. And if you just go with the example that you want to transport the same amount of capacity as that you can on a barge, on, for example, a truck, then it would cost almost 400,000 euros more per 1,000 kilometer. The case is the same with trains, because here it would cost 50,000 euros more to do this delivery. So that means when you're tapping into economies of scale and allows you to use barges instead of trains and trucks, you'll be able to tap into these cost savings and hereby decrease the cost of your entire organization. If you look next at the CO2 reduction, barges is here again a clear winner. The amount of CO2 that they emit is significantly lower than both trains and trucks. If we go with the same example as before and look at transporting the same amount of capacity, it would emit almost 400,000 more kilos to do it by train and almost 1 million more to do it by truck. This corresponds to burning 1 million kilos of coal just burning up. So as you can see, there are both there are many cost savings and great CO2 reductions that you can tap into if you go into this association and actually utilize economies of scale.
So we do acknowledge that the establishment of a partnership is a time and resource consuming activity. Therefore, we propose for Huntsman to initiate this through 5 tangible steps within the coming year. Firstly, it's crucial to establish a great foundation for future operations. So the first step that can be initiated on Monday morning is to reach out to the companies in the cluster, which Huntsman is already connected to. Secondly, these companies must be like-minded and have similar objectives and distribution needs in order for the collaboration to make sense. Once these companies are aligned internally, they should be able to initiate negotiations with the Port of Rotterdam and the carriers to express collective demand. As mentioned earlier, the Port of Rotterdam carries a significant role as a facilitator in the communication with carriers to ensure that supply of carriers meet the collective demand. It's important to also look into the future. So here the companies have to reconsider and renegotiate their needs for the future contracts on this specific collective needs.
So by implementing Uniting for a Better Future, we will allow Huntsman to lower its cost and lower its emissions, and we will make sure that you will continue winning in the future, but no longer by beating your competitors. Instead, you will be collaborating with them. Thank you very much, and we'll now be taking questions.